Lisa, what do you think this DOJ meeting that he just said he didn't know about, but he thinks is appropriate, is all about?
I can only speculate what it's about, given the statements that have been made both by Todd Blanche and by Ghislaine Maxwell's lawyer, David Oscar Marcus. But, Chris, one of the things that weighs heavily on me is where Ghislaine Maxwell is in her own journey in terms of contesting her conviction. Ghislaine Maxwell's 20-year sentence has been upheld by the Second Circuit. That's a federal court of appeals. She is now through the briefing before the Supreme Court to try and get the Supreme Court to review that conviction. The Department of Justice itself submitted a brief just last week in which they said that that conviction should stand because Ghislaine Maxwell was essentially not entitled to claim protection from a deal that Florida prosecutors cut with Jeffrey Epstein many years before that. That's the only question that's being asked of the Supreme Court. Was it right to say that Ghislaine Maxwell has no rights to enforce that agreement and therefore it was just to prosecute her? So one of the things that could be on the table here is Ghislaine Maxwell is facing 20 years in prison. She's already incarcerated. Her only saving grace right now could be a presidential pardon. And so there might be a deal to be made here, a pardon in exchange for congressional testimony or public statements about who else was involved. Remember, if you're pardoned, you can no longer claim the Fifth Amendment against self-incrimination because you have no prosecution to protect against. So if Ghislaine Maxwell is pardoned here, the Trump administration has, she has nothing to say in terms of protecting herself. She would have to talk if compelled to testify by a congressional committee. And the last thing I'll say is she would not be the first person who is incarcerated to be compelled to testify before a congressional committee. The fact that she's incarcerated now is not a barrier to bringing her before Congress to testify in either the House or the Senate.
But here's the key question, Tom. What are the chances Ghislaine Maxwell has some kind of critical information that hasn't been out there before? And what are the chances it comes out publicly, if it even exists?
I don't know what the heck she could testify to. I don't know what's going on here. The Trump administration successfully brought a case against Jeffrey Epstein in their first administration, a good investigation, and had a lot of evidence against him at the time when he died by suicide. He's dead. He's been dead for almost 6 years. So there's nothing new about Jeffrey Epstein as far as his activities since then that Ghislaine Maxwell or anybody else could testify to. As far as Ghislaine Maxwell, she is a convicted sex trafficker, period. Girls as young as 14 years old. That's what she's testified to. Prosecutors found her, we reported this at the time, found the activity and the things that they uncovered in the course of their investigation with the FBI here in New York. They found her behavior to be abhorrent. They aggressively prosecuted her on that case and were able to get a 20-year, as Lisa said, a 20-year prison sentence as a result. So as far as what else she has to bring, as we reported at the time, I was in the hearing, probably between me and 20 feet between myself and Ghislaine Maxwell. Federal prosecutors said, and the defense attorneys did not disagree with the fact that they never offered her a plea agreement at the time, nor had she asked for one. So it's not like she came to them and said, you guys might think you have me, but I have all sorts of other information I can give you. That was not the case back when she was on the trial effectively for her life. It's not a life imprisonment, but 20 years at her age is a long time. So there's no information that's come up then. There's no information in all the files that have come out. I mean, she's been deposed. People have been deposed about her activities for a decade plus. There's no information that's come up that suggests any sort of a client list. The Justice Department, whether people want to believe it or not, have already told you that there's no client list that exists. We've found no evidence of that over the decade of our reporting on it. So what else does she have to offer? There's all sorts of, to Lisa's point about the speculation about the types of things that she could say, the types of things politically she could say. I'm a law enforcement reporter. I'm focused on the law. I'm focused on criminality. I don't know what else she adds to the conversation at this point. And I do wonder what the victims think about the opportunity that she has a chance to speak out publicly, not in the court of law. Presumably, she could be held liable for lying to Congress if she did something along those lines. But what does she have to offer at this point? That's the big question. She's absolutely going to argue Again, it's something Elise alluded to going through the appellate system. She's talked about this nonstop, the idea that she was covered by the non-prosecution agreement, which is a real stretch. The courts have already ruled with respect to the law, or literally any legal analyst you could possibly talk to. So I just don't understand what the tactic is here to continue to bring this up. The Trump administration's Justice Department in the first term, if you want to look at it as far as, convictions they were able to get, charges they were able to bring, they already won. So we're going back and revisiting this issue.
I understand what you're both saying, approaching it from the law, but let's approach it from politics. And what we all know, Jeremy, is that the MAGA base wants answers. Whether or not the questions they're asking are legitimate, whether or not all of the information is already out there, they want something that they haven't seen yet. And just now, and the president is continuing to answer questions, he's been talking while we were talking about Barack Obama. He's been talking about the 2020 election and how he was robbed. He's been talking about the auto pen. He's been talking about anything that's not related to Epstein. And then he said something earlier, not only that he didn't know about Blanche, but he wants people to stop talking about this nonsense. I'm not paying attention. What do you see is going on here?
He is literally throwing out every other piece of red meat in a right-wing conspiracy theory world that he can at the moment. Some of these stories have, more legitimacy to them than others, but the bottom line is here, he is going to continue to embellish facts about, for example, what the Obama administration supposedly did to block his election in 2016. That's a latest fixation of his and of some of the MAGA influencers on the right. I mean, the problem is, as Tom laid out, there is nothing that the Trump administration can give to the Trump base right now that will satisfy them. As Thomas said, it doesn't exist, but even if it did exist, it wouldn't satisfy them because that's what conspiracy theories are. They are never ending and self-perpetuating.
Well, that's the problem, right? Let's say that they release the grand jury transcripts and there's a ton of redactions. Maybe
I know what they're going to say. Grand jury transcripts are going to be the testimony that was used in the indictment against Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. We already know the indictments are a summary of the grand jury testimony. To think that there's some sort of a unearthed piece of thing that's in there, they present the case to the grand jury that they want them to vote on to get to an indictment. So, yes, there might be more granular detail, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't expect there to be any sort of
but my point is, if there's anything at all that's redacted, that's another basis for a conspiracy theory.
That is correct. And there will be, to the extent that a federal judge allows any of these things to see the light of day. And that is a big if, because for the most part, they aren't released to the public. The law precludes it. But let's just say, for the sake of argument, they will be redacted heavily. Why? Because there's all sorts of victim identifying information in there, and not just their names. Chris, think about it this way. I could write something about my interactions with you, and I would take your name away from it. But if I talked about your physical identifying details, where you lived, your phone number, where you went to school, people could piece together a composite that we're talking about Chris Jansing. And so there is going to be a ton of redactions in anything that's released publicly from the grand jury. I would suggest to people who are eager for more details, there are tons of deposition transcripts that have been unsealed in various civil litigations involving Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein. I read two yesterday, one where Ghislaine Maxwell was the deponent, another where Jeffrey Epstein was the deponent. MAGA wants this handed to them in a binder with a bow wrapped around it, but anybody who has a computer and a Pacer password can get all the access they want to information, including very pointed questions from, for example, Virginia Giuffre. She's one of the most famous victims. Her lawyer to Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell asking about other people who might be implicated. But the truth remains that Jeffrey Epstein operated a sex trafficking ring principally for his own benefit. As one of the victims' lawyers has said, he was both the pimp and the John. That is an inconvenient truth that MAGA world does not want to accept. They want to see that there is a long list of clients, but for the most part, with a handful of exceptions, the person who was benefited by this perverse sex trafficking ring was Jeffrey Epstein and at times Ghislaine Maxwell.